Hey everybody, welcome to the Geek Reloading Podcast. I am your host Adam, and as always my co-host Josh.
Hello.
And we're back to our regularly scheduled programming. We actually have another retro roundup for us. Now, I put this one up there as a suggestion, and me and Josh started going through it. And then as soon as we did, Josh kind of just ran with it. He's really excited about the game side. So expect that from Josh.
Yeah, so really quick, like just to give a shout out to our Gaming Memories host awesomeness, Mr. Cade. He had this concept like in his podcast that he kind of feels like there is a certain game system that you kind of connect with gaming the most with. Mm-hmm. For him, it's PlayStation, the original. Mm-hmm. I realized like Sega is like I'm very partial to Nintendo, like back in the day, the old 8-bit, but I realized Sega is when gaming became super special to me, and I wanted to, I collected this stuff constantly. Like I really just loved it. So yeah, I think I went a little bit crazy overboard with the Sega stuff.
Yeah, so that's what it is. It is the Sega Genesis specifically, because obviously there's the Sega, what is it called, the Master Console or something like that beforehand? Yeah, the Mega Drive. Mega Drive. Yeah, that's what it was. But we're going to focus on the Sega Genesis, just like how when we started with Nintendo, people were like, "What about Atari?" Okay, well this is our area. This is our generation's worth of stuff, right? So
we might go back and do Atari, because I've got some memories on that. I collected a lot of Atari stuff later on, but
did you collect a lot of Atari stuff?
Yeah, I had like a huge like garbage bin full of games and stuff. You know, shout out to the DI. But
oh yeah.
Yeah, and then my brother stole it, and it was a thing.
It was you between you and your brother. There was constant console stealing between you and him, like always.
No, I stole his PlayStation because he stole my Atari and then sold it. So
fair, but still, it sounds like it was a back and forth and back and forth. Okay, so let's get started. So first off, Sega Genesis was released in 1988. Is that what it was?
I think so.
I think that's what it was. No, it was 1989. So the 14th of August, 1989 is what it says that it was the US launch. So this one actually, so what's really kind of cool about the Sega is that the Sega was the first time that you actually started seeing some sort of competitor when it came to Nintendo. Like Atari kind of didn't compete against anyone. It had the ColecoVision, but honestly, come on. But when Nintendo and Sega started competing against each other, that was the first like real console war in my mind.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The first console war, you know, Sega does what Nintendo don't, and you know, all that. This was the first real competitor, and that was the thing is like the first thing I thought of when you put this up, I was like, how did Sega never step up? Like they were out for quite a while when it was just Sega and Nintendo, the 8-bit. They were 16-bit. They had all the cool flashy, you know, they had this giant super speedy hedgehog versus a fat plumber. Like,
so an interesting thing about that is that Sega knew coming into it that they were going to have to market almost to a different demographic. Nintendo, their entire marketing scheme from the very beginning was create solid games for kids and hook them as fans of your console and your games as a child, and then they'll follow you throughout their life, which technically, if you look at it, they did it right. For Nintendo, they're very successful. And you look at, it's the same 6 or 7 games that people look forward to every single console. A new Mario, a new Legend of Zelda and stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. But Sega knew that for them to be competitive, they were going to have to focus on marketing towards an older gaming demographic. And they spent
teenagers.
Yeah, the teenagers. They spent millions doing this. An interesting fact about this, they actually went and they followed a couple of teenagers. I think it was like 10 teenagers for months. And they recorded all their interactions, what they did with their friends, what they were interested in, what kind of stuff that they were watching and all that kind of stuff. And that's what shaped their marketing campaign. If you look at the old Sega commercials and stuff like that, they're like straight up 90s teenager, just brain explosion. It's just
brain explosion is the best, most accurate description of Sega's I've ever heard. That's so true.
their entire marketing campaign was bright colors, loud, edgy, talking about
Sega.
extreme sports, all that kind of stuff. And all their games also reflected that, because sure, you had games that were cross-platform, but they really tried to capitalize on games that were going to be interesting for older generation, or not older generation, but the older demographic. And they were trying to capitalize on that side, which I think was really good, because if you look at around Sega Genesis and around Nintendo and Super Nintendo, that's when you started seeing games kind of have a more, at least console games, have a more mature option, So
yeah,
you're right. Like the reason why they never stepped up or they were contenders, I feel like they were kind of competing in two different markets.
Yeah, but I mean, like, they never had the staying power. Like,
yes,
because they were. I don't know. I just don't understand it, because they were competing with Nintendo and Super Nintendo, and I don't understand why they didn't blow Nintendo out of the water. Like, because back then it was all about graphics. Like,
that's true.
To 16, like 16 was like holy crap. Then it was like they got the 32X before, anything else. Like, they always were a couple years behind, but a step ahead. Every time they took a step, they were ahead of the game.
Yeah.
It's just but they never got into anything that was lasting.
So I agree with you. I think that it was also because they were in a weird, almost like halfway point. They didn't launch the same time as Nintendo. They didn't launch the same time as Super Nintendo. And so it was kind of like they were halfway between the two. So they were kind of competing. They were kind of being attacked from both sides in a sense, if you look at it.
Yeah, but I mean, think of it this way. Like right now, you've got Xbox and you've got PlayStation. Those are the two main competitors. If those two, like, if you had Xbox come out and they brought out the Sexbox, the brand new console that they're coming out with, if they had dropped that 4 years ago, so it was like right in the middle of PlayStation 4, and they came out with the new hotness, like, don't you think a lot of people would be going, oh wow, like that's the new thing? So, like, instead of like being on the same time frame, like, wouldn't that be a lot more people jumping to that console, or not having to buy two systems like right off the bat? Like, when everyone just jump on that system. That's the way I look at it.
Sure, but also you're looking at it from this day and age. If you think about back then, dude, people only really attributed video games to Nintendo or arcades. So maybe there was also that gap of knowledge where they didn't recognize, because I mean, think about how they were marketing these things. They were marketing them in commercials between cartoons and comic book ads.
I've got so many old Sega ads and comic books that I collect.
If you think about it, it was half marketing and half education. They were trying to say, here's why you want to over Nintendo. Here's why. And that's why they had that Sega does what Nintendo don't. I mean, so it's definitely something that it was an interesting time for gaming in general, because it really was this unique market that was kind of still trying to figure stuff out. And so,
like you said before, like some of you mentioned that the arcades, like the Sega was built off of arcade boards. I didn't know that, which is freaking cool. So I mean, they were able to port over a lot more of the arcade games. Like, I remember playing Strider on the Sega for the first time and going, what the hell is this? This is not the Strider that I know and love from the Nintendo.
Yep.
And it was the arcade port of it, which it was okay, but it wasn't the one that I knew from the Nintendo. Yeah. But
so there was something about that. Like, let's go over a few of these little facts real quick, because it kind of leans into that. So first off, you're right. They were made. The original Segas were designed off of arcade boards, and like you said, it did give them a bit of an edge, because it was the first time you started seeing almost arcade level graphics imported into your home, because that was something that the arcade specifically, you were getting a different experience in an arcade than you were from a Nintendo. And that's something that people noticed. Whereas when Sega came into the competitiveness, it started blurring that line even more. What that also did is it gave them a really close port of a lot of arcade games, like Golden Axe and Altered Beasts. So those are two of the biggest ones that Sega tried to market about, because they were also some of the most popular ones that were in the arcades at the time.
Yeah, and they were pretty much perfect ports. Like, it was even insert coin. Like, it even had that still on there. You just had to press A or Start or whatever it was. But
Yeah,
I mean, they were great ports, and you could play them without paying every time you wanted a new life.
Yeah, and that was actually probably a part of a marketing, a bit of a marketing edge too, where you could convince like I don't have to go to the arcade anymore if you'll buy me this. Like I think that was another way that they kind of edged that out.
Oh yeah, I could see that.
So the Sega sold just under 31 million Genesis units worldwide. But what's interesting is that it was released from Japan, but just over 10% of that margin was actually in Japan. It was just like, I think it was just under 4 million or so. And actually where they had a surprisingly large positive market was in Brazil specifically, crazy. And South America, because they had partnered with a company down there. I think it was called Toy Tech, and they were building the Genesis models down there, but they were considered a Genesis model. And so that's where they got a huge market push, was actually in South America, which is pretty interesting.
That is really interesting because they haven't really been a driving force.
Yeah, so, not until the 360 generation and whatnot did they really start becoming start pushing again that way. So Josh, what was the first game that you think was packed in the bundles with the Genesis? Or you might know because it's in your age range.
I think it was Columns. Maybe not. Maybe that was later on. Maybe that was with the Genesis 2.
I think that was with the Genesis 2. It was one of the arcade ports that they had.
Was it Altered Beast?
Yes, it was. Well done.
I love that game. Honestly, like that was one of my favorite games. I spent a lot in the arcade playing that game because I thought it was so cool. You turn into this awesome beast that can shoot like powers from its fists.
You shot powers from your fist, and you did this like V knee jolt.
Yeah, like the dash.
Dash
attack.
Yeah.
But
and that was the first one that was actually packed with the Genesis when it first released. That's so
crazy. Back in the day, thinking about that.
Yeah. So finally, eventually, they knew that they had to create a mascot of some sort, and everybody knows that Sonic the Hedgehog became the mascot as a contender to Mario. So,
and I mean, it was so much cooler. Like, definitely, he was 90s all the way.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, he was just cooler than Mario. Mario was a round plumber.
Yeah.
And you had this super fast.
He was a mildly obese, middle-aged Italian plumber versus a blue blur of a hedgehog.
Yeah. With like, the legs that spun around in the circle, which was crazy.
Yeah. I never liked the Sonic games because the in my brain as a kid, I was like, but if you get hit, you lose all those coins and they disappear before you can pick them up again. And in my like kid brain, I'm like, that's not fun. I worked really hard for those coins. And somebody had to explain to my like 7-year-old ass, is like, no, it's like your life. It's your life amount. So you always need them to make sure that you have enough lives. That's why. And I'm like, well, that's dumb. And I just didn't get it. And I just think it overwhelmed me. I guess I was the middle-aged Italian plumber speed more than the Sonic speed. I don't know. It broke my brain is what happened.
That makes sense. I mean, I had a hard time with the Sonics for a while because it was just so fast. You just had to like, it was almost like on rails. You had to go certain places at certain ways. And I always took it slower in a lot of cases, and I found a lot of cool secrets because those games were filled with weird little places you could get to. But
but it was meant to be like played fast, and it was meant to show, and it was supposed to be like a showstopper, showing the sheer speed that the console could go. Like that was specifically part of what Sonic was doing, was trying to show you just how impressive the graphical capability of Sega Genesis was. And so, I mean, for what it was, it made its mark. I mean, there's been a bajillion Sonic games since then, and there's a movie that came out this year, which was not good, but also, you know what? It was fun, but it wasn't good.
Real quick question. Which would you say is better, the Mario movie or the Sonic movie?
Well, Sonic movie, but Sonic movie came decades after the Mario movie.
Dude, if you're talking Mario Brothers with John
Leguizamo as Luigi. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's fun.
Mario, Luigi Mario. I mean,
you bastardized Bowser and the Koopas and all that. Like it was weird. It's as weird as Double Dragon, right. Which Double Dragon also was.
Oh, I love Double Dragon.
Oh my gosh. Anyway.
Anyways.
So an interesting fact, in Japan, actually, they actually had a Mega Modem and the Sega Network cartridge. So they actually had an ability to use online services all the way back in the 90s. But the Mega Modem was primarily used for like accessing your bank and making small payments and printing off receipts and all that kind of stuff. But that was one of those weird peripherals that came out for Sega.
See, and that's another thing. Like, I just, it's just boggling to my mind. I don't understand it, honestly, is like Sega had like online capabilities. Like the Sega Saturn was the first one with an internal modem that they, you could hook up and like it worked. Like you could play online games and it actually worked with other games. Like,
yeah,
but they just, no.
Yeah.
Oh no.
It's one of those things. Early adoption doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be good though, too. There's that as well.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think we ever give them credit because Sega Saturn did it so much earlier than all the other systems, and like maybe they just worked out the bugs. We don't give them the credit for like figuring that shit out before like everyone else did it.
Yeah, it takes the trailblazers to, like, some people have to learn to crawl so others can run, you know? And so there is that too. Speaking on that, actually, in America, like if you were upset about Xbox Live Gold being a subscription and all that kind of stuff, Sega actually had a subscription-based online model called the Sega Channel, and it was used through your phone modem, but also through your cable service, where you could actually like download games to a Sega specific console and or a Sega specific peripheral through your cable modem, and you could play that. And that was all the way back in 1990.
Like, that's insane. Like they were out there jogging, maybe tripping when they do, but they were jogging when everyone else was crawling, it seems. Like, what the hell? I just
it was easily a decade before the internet as we see it now actually started creating, before like America Online and that kind of stuff. That was like 97 or so.
Holy crap.
You know, and so they were part of this early on trailblazing, which is kind of cool. So, I mean, besides that, it looks like there was about a dozen. They think there might have been more. Like I did a little bit of research, but they've kind of finalized on about a dozen different models, different types of the Genesis were made. And this definitely brought me back to the idea of Josh, back when you and me first met as friends when I was a kid. You had a Sega Genesis 3, which was a very small one. It looked like an old school.
Half.
Yeah, it looked like an old school CD player, like two CD players stacked on top of each other.
Oh, like a
Discman.
Like Discman. Yeah.
Yeah.
It did. And really it was so small. And what I loved about it, I mean, mine was broken, like the little top tray, because I got it used. The top tray, half of it was broken off, so it was like always open. But seriously, like what I loved, because I had the first one and then I had a second one, and the second one was a lot nicer. It had a button press instead of the switch to turn on, but the Genesis 3 just like worked. It's like going from like the old on the 8-bit Nintendo, like the front loading to the top loading. It was like that. It was such a better system, just like internals and the way it connected to the games wise. It was just so much better.
Yeah,
and it was so small.
They had so many different models when I was looking at it. They also had one that was a Sega CD player, like a boombox, and where the tape deck, where old school CD players, where you'd see a tape deck pop out, that's where you'd put the cartridge and you'd be able to pop it in, and the sound for the game would play through the speakers of the boombox, but then you could hook it up to a TV with the yellow cable, and that's where you'd play the video games. Like they had some crazy consoles. And so that was something. And you mentioned the Nomad.
Dude,
something.
The Nomad was the coolest thing I had ever seen in my life.
Which one was the Nomad? Was that the handheld one?
Yes, it was the handheld like Sega Genesis console. Like you could play it. The only problem with the Nomad, and this is the only thing that just made this not usable, was the battery.
Batteries with everything.
Seriously, it took 8 batteries and it would work for an hour, maybe an hour and a half. Like,
Yeah.
seriously, it literally sucked batteries like nobody's business.
I believe that.
They also had like a weird problem with the AC adapter. So like you had to get a specific AC adapter from them. I got a couple of like the older like aftermarket one, and they just didn't work.
Wow.
So it was like I tried to use that, but it was like I literally had to tape it so it was connecting a certain way. Like, it was stupid. But yeah, the Nomad was such a cool concept. It was such a solid system and everything, and a good screen.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
for the time, especially, like, it was a really bright screen, and it was back when backlighting wasn't fully developed, like, in comparison.
Well, I mean, like, they had the backlit colored screen on the
Game Gear.
Yeah. And I mean, that was what was competing against the Nintendo Game Boy. I don't understand why they didn't do better.
Well, for the Game Gear specifically, price point and game selection, because it had
game selection,
it had a handful of games. It sucked batteries even harder than a Game Boy. Once Game Boy Pocket showed up and you were able to expand your battery life to literally weeks on a pair of batteries, if you were conservative with the gameplay, that made a huge dent in it, because people just, I mean, in this day and age of rechargeables, it's like a no-brainer. It's not a problem, right? But back in the day, man, shelling out $5-6 in batteries every single time you wanted to play it, and then that was like a weekly to 2-week kind of thing, that adds up, especially for a kid.
No doubt. But it was like the Game Gear, because I had a Game Gear later on, and it wasn't that bad. I mean, granted, it was quite a bit worse than the Game Boy. But when you mentioned like the Game Boy Pocket came out, like that's the Nomad had come out just before then, and it was an actual like game system that you could play on. Like,
yeah, Sega took a lot of cool risks back then, man. They really did.
They just. I guess none of it paid out. Like, well, I guess they were a contender for a very long time. So, I mean, I can't really say. But, all right, let's move on.
So, an interesting thing that I learned about when I was doing my research was a big part of their marketing was what they called blast processing. That was something where they were trying to talk about how much faster and how much better they were when it came to them versus the Super Nintendo. This was part of their marketing against the Super Nintendo, right? So blast processing actually was a real thing. What it was is that developers actually discovered a trick where they were able to, in certain situations, send different types of processing to the Sega Genesis. And the way that they configured that data and sending it to the system, it would actually compute it and send it back out faster than they expected. And so when they were talking to developers going, hey, what can you say about the Sega? A bunch of them were talking about this. And one of them talked about how they almost had like a blast function. That's what they called it, like a blast processing function. So they took that buzzword idea and they actually turned an entire marketing campaign around it. What was funny about that, though, is that the blast data processing, it was something that worked sometimes. It had to be in like certain situations and certain conditions, right? But actually, even though they were always talking about Sega's blast processing, on paper, everything else that the Sega did was below capability in comparison to the Super Nintendo. But they took that one like buzzword idea and they turned it into an entire marketing campaign that kept them afloat during that competition.
And that was the first time when they were talking about the blast processing, was the first time that I had heard the Sega does but Nintendo don't.
Yep.
Tagline.
Yeah.
But that is kind of funny.
Yeah. So even though they talked about blast data or blast processing, the Super Nintendo is still more superior. So another thing,
the Super Nintendo came out quite a bit later than the Sega Genesis. So it
like
makes
I
sense.
said, man, Sega Genesis was halfway between the two. And so it was above the Nintendo, but the Nintendo had the brand recognition by then. And then when the Super Nintendo
games by then.
Yeah. And then when Super Nintendo came out, it had more power. So it was this weird halfway point. It was literally the exact same thing that happened to the Dreamcast. They have just shit luck when it comes to console releases.
They did. They had terrible luck with that. Like that's all that I can come down to is just luck.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those like risky things where if you're launching in between console windows, which realistically console windows were still like a nebulous idea at the time, but if you're launching between them, you run the risk of not capitalizing on brand recognition, not capitalizing on capability, and instead being this it almost appears to be a half hobbled attempt at a console when realistically they were doing stuff that was way better than other consoles at the time.
Yeah, I don't know. Just ridiculous.
Yeah. Anyway, so a few more. Sega actually was the very first group in America to introduce a rating system for video games. This happened in the 90s. Do you remember like Mortal Kombat and Rampage, Primal Rage and stuff like that? Yeah, where blood effects and stuff created this huge fear in American government and, like parents alike that were like, oh, too many adult situations and Night Terror. What is the video game that has like live video footage and you're like Night Stalker? Is it the one where the women are the women are on like a sleepover or something like that?
Yeah, and it was like tank tops and short shorts, like
nothing
that the 70s didn't like constantly show everyone else anyways.
So that one and it was that one and Mortal Kombat that actually really created the need in government supposedly saying save our children, and why are any kids able to grab any game at a rental store, that was what created this need. And Sega was actually the very first company that came out with an actual rating system. They created their own rating system. Night Trap. That's what it was. Night Trap. That's what it was. Crazy. My God. Middle of my sentence. Anyway, so they actually created something called the Video Games Rating Council, and it actually had 3 different ratings. It had G, meaning general audience, and then mature audience, which is a really weird stretch because it was mature audience 13 or a mature audience 17. And so they had like this really simplified GMAM 17 rating that eventually was replaced by the universal, in at least America, ESRB, which is now the uniform one across the board. But they were the first ones to do it.
No one pays attention to anyways now. So
yeah, that
is kind of interesting. Like, yeah, I didn't realize that they were the first ones, but it kind of made sense because Nintendo didn't really have a rating system. That was just literally like a seal of approval, which was garbage.
Yes,
because Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde got the seal of Nintendo's approval.
Yeah, we should touch base on that on the NES, because the Nintendo seal of approval was just something that a publisher could essentially apply for, and then they would just automatically get it. Almost, it was very, very simplified and rudimentary rules or guidelines to meet to get that, and so you got a lot of shit third-party games. Anyway.
I think it was pretty much like, hey, pay us some money, and we'll put this seal on your game.
Yeah. So a couple more things. Some games on the Sega Genesis were actually $100 or more. And the reason why is because when they were competing with Super Nintendo, they started realizing that power and processing was part of the problem. So what they did actually is that they started actually having certain developers, if they wanted to use 3D or something like that. Think about Star Fox on Super Nintendo. There was a racing game that was 3D that actually had an internal chip in the cartridge to help improve processing. And that game was $100, or at the worst place, like I think it was like it was bundled with like a game guide. It was like $125 for that
Seriously,
game.
Some of those games, like you can even see them now. Like they had the main chip coming out of the middle, but then they had 2 extra smaller chips coming off to the side.
Yeah.
And so it still fit in the same slot, but it's crazy. Like some of that stuff is just insane to me.
Yeah. And so besides that, the very last little fact before we get into the games that we liked of it is that Sega was the very first company that actually started hyping games and creating release date specific like excitement, like a movie premiere. They were the ones that actually started saying, hey, this actually looks like something you would be really, really excited about. Get ready to get it before the holiday season. And they did it with Sonic 2. That was actually, I think, the very first one that they did, where part of their marketing campaign was not just, hey, Sonic 2, it's out in stores now. It was, hey, it's showing up in the next few months. Get excited. And that's what started creating this kind of similarity to movies and movie trailers, right?
And then they started doing the consoles in the stores where you could actually like play the games before they were out. And Yep, that caused a lot of headaches for parents everywhere.
Yeah, but it was the first time that these kind of marketing strategies and these kinds of elements were brought into video game marketing. So that was pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
That is all of my quick, interesting facts about the retro roundup Sega Genesis. But now let's get to the important part: the games that we liked with Sega. This was like, dude, this one I didn't play a ton. This was one of the oh god, this is so old.
A lot of the time you played was probably with me and on mine.
It was either with
like
you and on
on
yours, or back in the day, dude, we would rent a Sega Genesis from a video store like Blockbuster with like 3 games. It was like a $20 like
25.
thing. Yeah,
25.
and you'd get it for like the weekend.
Yep.
It's crazy that you'd spend that much just to rent one.
Yeah.
Like,
and it was always a big deal when you did. Like,
oh yeah, like that was your fucking weekend. Like you were stoked. That was one of those things.
It was like you canceled plans with friends. Oh, you don't want to come over and play?
Or you made plans with friends, one or the other.
You want to go out? No, I rented a Sega. Like, no, dude, come on over.
Dude, legit. Yep. I can't remember what birthday. I want to say it was my 9th or my 10th birthday. My mom was like, "What do you want?" I'm like, "I want pizza and I want to rent a Sega." And I literally remember in my mind, I was like, this probably seems like the saddest birthday ever. But I was so stoked to just sit there and eat pizza and candy and play. I had a bitchin' birthday. But I look back at it and I'm like, my siblings probably thought that was really sad. And my mom probably thought that was really sad. But I really enjoyed that birthday.
You had so much fun with it. Who cares?
So, Josh.
All right.
Let's talk about some of these games. Let's talk about, you've got, like I said, Josh got super excited.
I've got a million on here. I got way overexcited.
Yeah, let's have you talk about a few of them. We can jump around. I'll just mark them as we go. I think that let's just talk about a few that you're into. Okay,
so I'm gonna try to kind of go from like early on, like earlier memories. Like I think I got Echo the Dolphin, like almost the
oh my gosh,
like when I got my first Sega, I think I got Echo the Dolphin. And dude, I loved that game because it was ridiculous. Like it was such a simple game, but I loved it. Then there was like Michael Jackson Moonwalker.
That's the one that I remember being this like, you have to play it. It's amazing. And realistically, it wasn't.
No, but it really wasn't. But it was fun, and it was like, it was actually like pretty decent, and it was kind of interesting. And you know, if you watch the movie at the time, it actually went along with the movie pretty close, which is sad.
Yo, hang on a tick. Am I just learning that there was a Moonwalker movie?
Seriously, you've never watched Michael Jackson Moonwalker?
It's not a music video. It's a movie.
No, it's a movie. It's a full-length movie, dude. We've got to watch this together. We're gonna have to watch this together. Do not go and watch this without me. I have to watch you watch this.
I thought it was just a video game.
Nope, it was based off of a movie. Dude, okay, we have to watch that together. You guys, we're gonna do an actual episode with us sitting and watching this movie together.
Was it even good? I have so many questions.
No, dude, okay. We're gonna have to. Yep.
All right. This just blew wide open for me. Okay. All right. I learned something new today. That's fucking weird. Okay.
Another early game that I had was Shadow Dancer. It was like Shinobi 2. And it was such a crazy like ninja game. You're throwing stars, like you're a freaking ninja. You're Shinobi.
Okay.
Like, you had a wolf, dude. You had a wolf, and you could tell the wolf to go and like hold down enemies. Well, oh, dude, I loved it. Oh, I love Shadow Dancer.
So your love of dogs in video games probably started around then with Shadow Dancer.
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I never had a puppy when I was little, like when I was a kid, so I needed them in video games.
So here's one that you and me have both talked about in the past, and I think I even talked about this one with Kate on his podcast. But that's Eternal Champions. Like, dude, this,
it was so great.
It was so great because it was a game that came out trying to compete with Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, I believe. Specifically Mortal Kombat, though, because they were trying to like up the gore, but it was like a Street Fighter style with animation, but it had some pretty hilarious and gory finishers on that one.
Yeah, and like the characters were so generic, in my opinion. I think that's why it never really came around.
But they were generic, but they were interesting because they spanned across like time. Like you had a cyborg fighting a caveman looking thing versus a mage versus a private eye detective. Like,
nope, he wasn't a private eye detective. His name was Larson, and he was a thief, but he had a trench coat.
I thought he was a detective.
Nope, he had like because he had like the grappling hook where he could swing off of, so he could climb into buildings and shit. No, his name was Larson. He had like the little, 1950s like robber mask on.
Oh, I never knew that. Wasn't there like there was a sea creature too? There was.
There was a sea creature. There were Trident.
I have the characters up. Trident, the Atlantean gladiator.
What was the girl that was like very scantily clad?
Probably Jeddah Max.
Yep, Jeddah. That's the one I always liked. I always wanted to play as Larson because he was a dude in a trench coat, but then Jeddah was hot.
You had Rax, who was a cyber kickboxer from 2345 AD.
Fuck.
And then you had Shadow Yamato, a ninja assassin. Slash, which was the prehistoric hunter. Xavier, who was the alchemist student. He was the one that was like burned alive, so he was like half on fire all the time.
Yep.
And Midnight and Larson Tyler, a former cat burglar. Look at you, man.
Look at me remembering that shit.
Yeah. So each one of these were like people who were killed and they were fighting for eternal salvation or something was the idea. Yeah.
I didn't pay attention to storylines at that time.
Yeah. But that one was fun. And I remember playing that with my brother a lot. It was a lot of fun. What else do we got, Josh? Oh, Josh. Let's knock out Altered Beast and Golden Axe, because that one, we already talked about Altered Beast being awesome, but Golden Axe was just 4-player fun. It was 2-player fun.
It was so much fun. Because I always loved to be the dwarf. He had this big freaking axe, and it was just like, dude, like it was so ridiculous because I remember putting a lot of quarters into arcades to play this game, or even just watching it when I didn't have the money. Yep. But like, I actually was able to play this all the time when I, at home. It was crazy. Yeah. Like both of those, like I loved Altered Beast, and then I was able to play it at home and play it over and over and over.
My favorite part about Golden Axe, going back and remembering it and playing it, was for some reason, it was early on in the levels too, because I never got very far because I played it mostly on arcade, but it was probably like the second or third level. You have these like Amazon Valkyrie looking ladies riding on like velociraptors. Yeah. That's what I remember from Golden Axe. That's what I specifically remember. I remember being a dwarf and going, they're riding a dinosaur. They're mixing like fantasy with prehistoric Jurassic Park looking motherfuckers. All right, that's fine, but I wanted it to be known that I oppose this. That's all.
I just love that the dwarf was just as big as the other two characters, the Amazon and the Barbarian, but he was just wide.
Yeah, just
to make him look like
he was thick boy.
Yeah, it was just crazy. But I love the potion that there was a couple potions that you could do, and they were like special attacks, and it was like rain fire from the sky, so big meteors came down, or actually a dragon would blow fire, which was the coolest idea.
Yeah, I remember that, man. That was fun. So this one is a quick one. You talked about it more than anything else. Let's have you go over it, man. And I just remember a few things from it.
So the very end of the console, like they came out with, it was competing with
Donkey Kong.
It was Donkey Kong because they had the 3D graphics that were sprite like made into sprites. So it was a 3D game, but Vector Man, it was such a fun game. It was just ridiculous.
It was fun, and the competition that they created at the release of Vector Man, they had this whole thing where the first person to beat Vector Man was going to win, I think, like $1 million. Do you remember that?
It was something stupid, like
yeah. So
and I don't even think if anything like actually came of it, because it was anyways.
I remember my cousin John was like, yo, I'm getting it that night. I'm going to beat it and I'm going to get that money. And I was like, cool. Can I have some when you get it? He's like, totally. And then he beat it like 2 days later. And he's like, yeah, somebody beat it that same night. I did not beat it.
Yeah. And it had like, I remember playing it like later on in the levels, like it got really hard really quick.
Yeah.
Like, it was a super fun first and second level. Third was hard.
And then just ramped up.
And then like 5 and 6 were impossible.
Yikes. Explain this one to me. You listed Toe Jam and Earl. I never played this one. So explain this one to me.
Toe Jam and Earl, like I got Toe Jam and Earl 2, Panic in Funkatown or Funkatron. Like I got that one first, and then I went back and played the original. And so pretty much Toe Jam and Earl is you crash on Earth and you're going around these different islands looking for your parts of your ship. But in the second one, humans have come to your planet and they're like screwing everything up. And so you're literally like running around throwing bottles at humans, trying to bottle them up and collect them to get them off of your planet. It was ridiculous. It was just, and it was like the stereotypical like people. There were, it was just ridiculous. Like tourists and anyways, yeah, it was just ridiculous and just fun. It was just, and it had good music. So nice. I played it a lot when I was back in the day.
So we've talked a lot about this group, but you and me both had this one on the list, and that was Sonic and Knuckles.
Now, Sonic and Knuckles is the coolest thing because it was a cartridge that you plugged another cartridge in.
And you could play Knuckles through all the older games.
All the old games that you've already beat and played, and all of a sudden you could play in a whole new way.
That was really cool about it.
That was the coolest concept. It was such an awesome concept.
It was something that, like I said, Sega and them just had some crazy ideas and some awesome stuff that they were willing to try, even if it didn't work. I feel like Sonic and Knuckles totally did work. Sure, maybe their modem didn't, but this did work.
Well, I mean, they had the Sega CD, they had the 32X, they had additions to the system. It was crazy. Anyways.
So, what's the next one, man? What do you got?
Let me just hit a couple really quick. So, the next one is Desert Strike, Jungle Strike, and Urban Strike.
I never played any of these.
You're a helicopter. You're going around. You're shooting. You've got like a machine gun. You've got missiles. You've got heavy missiles, and you're just going around clearing areas. Like you have to take out these terrorists in this little fortification. And,
was it like top down?
Yeah, it was it was top down, and it was just kind of off to the side a little bit, and you had to collect people and save people and then take them to certain places.
Nice.
It was I played that game so much. And then one of the things I definitely wanted to say that I loved Splatterhouse.
Yeah.
Splatterhouse. Dude, that game, every time I played it, I was like the very first, you beat the first level and you see your girlfriend or wife, I can't remember what it is.
It's her girlfriend.
But you see her die in these cutscenes and you're just like, oh shit, I'm pissed. You can just, it was so emotional to me.
Yeah.
And it was just, you look like, Jason from Friday the 13th. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. And just
this overly big muscular dude.
And just stabbing and throwing knives at these gross alien looking things. It was just ridiculous.
What was awesome and interesting about Splatterhouse is that they specifically leaned into the slasher horror vibe that it already had in all of its marketing. They were like, this game is not for kids. It'll make you vomit and all that kind of stuff. And it totally worked for them. like, sure, it was also probably one of the things that definitely pushed that we need a rating system, but it also is exactly how they got this interesting section of the market, like catering to an older demographic and everything. Splatterhouse, I think, was definitely one of those things.
Absolutely.
So Splatterhouse, I got one that's a little bit lighter hearted. That's definitely interesting. I am a sucker for this one because it was just such a fun time, and it was right when I was like one of the few times in the world that I was interested in sports, and that was NBA Jam. It was on Super Nintendo as well, but NBA Jam and NBA Jam Tournament Edition were some of the most fun games of the generation. Getting on fire, playing as the mascots, you can play as Bill Clinton.
Heads.
Yeah. All that kind of stuff was amazing.
A lot of fun stuff. And, it was actually like people that you knew, like if you followed the NBA, like you could play as certain people.
Yeah, you could play as Jordan and Pippen. You could play as Muggsy Bogues, man. You could play as all sorts of, like, those are growing up, like Patrick Ewing and all that kind of stuff.
I like basketball more than any other sport, but I was a nerd, so I didn't really watch everything. So it's like, I'm from Utah, so I gotta play Malone and Stockton, and that was freaking awesome.
Yeah, it was one of those times. And also, if you did enough dunks in one game, you'd break the backboard.
Yeah, and it would shatter everywhere.
Yeah, that game was just good fun. It was good fun.
It was fun. It was just ridiculous.
Speaking of fun and ridiculous, man, we have another one that you and me both shared on, and that was Earthworm Jim.
Yes, that game is so ridiculous.
It makes, like, even if you go back now and watch Earthworm Jim or play it, it still makes no sense.
It makes no sense at all.
I know that they built a cartoon and all that kind of stuff, but if you think about it as just, I bought a game, it happened to be called this, and I plug it in, everybody when they first played that went, what the fuck is this? This is so weird.
Seriously, the story is there's this power suit that drops from space, and this Earthworm Jim, crawls in it, gets augmented, becomes a bigger worm pretty much, and uses this power suit to go and save a princess.
Yeah. So weird.
And that is the most calm and less ridiculous part of the entire game. Like, that is one of the parts that make the most sense.
Yeah, that's the most, like, level-headed synopsis I've ever heard.
Yeah. I mean, and it only gets more insane from there.
Facts.
All right.
Okay.
Really quick, because this was one of the funnest games I've ever played, is Cyborg Justice.
Okay, so what was it?
So you had a robot, and you could, when you're fighting, you could actually go and steal parts off of other robots.
Oh, I think Cade was talking about this one.
Yes, he was. And it's like you can pull off an arm and then put it on. And then, like, you're fighting a guy, you can punch him a few times and then pull off his arm and then throw it away, or throw it at him even. And he'd have to go and pick it up to use it again. And so there's
awesome.
all these different arms and legs, and there's certain legs you had to have for jumping. There's a tank tread leg where you could actually, like, charge into guys. It was crazy.
Interesting. That would be a fun remake. They should do a new one of Cyborg Justice.
Absolutely. It would be really fun. Another really quick fun one would be Kid Chameleon, where you'd get these helmets and you'd get these different powers. So, like, you have this, like, spiked skull helmet, and you could run into stuff and break rocks with your head. Like,
nice.
Just crazy.
So one that is a favorite of Cade's, and it's a favorite of mine. It was actually one of my most played beat 'em ups was Streets of Rage 2. Did you ever play the Streets of Rage at all?
Oh yeah. I actually added it on until I saw, you've already got on there.
Yeah, dude. So Streets of Rage was so fun. And that one was also, like, when they introduced the new characters, like Blade, like the teenage kid on the rollerblades. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's why I liked it. I was like, that kid. I never rollerbladed in my life until I was like 14, but like that kid, I'm like, yeah, we're kindred spirits.
Super cool.
Totally
he's
makes
fighting
sense.
All these grown-ups and everything. Yeah.
So Josh, we got 2 left. Do you want to go first? Or you want me to go first?
You go first.
Okay. So I have to talk about a couple. It's technically 2, but I'm really talking about one of them. And I'm talking about X-Men and X-Men 2: The Clone Wars. Now, first off, X-Men, when that one came out, I was super jazzed about it because it was the X-Men that I grew up with, the one that I remember from the comic books.
It had
you know,
Gambit in it. Like
it had Gambit, it had Wolverine, Nightcrawler.
Nightcrawler.
Yeah.
Like they were not normal characters. And I know you. Okay, go ahead.
Like it was one where I wanted it to be good, and it wasn't. It just wasn't.
I disagree with you. I completely disagree with you because I went from the original X-Men Nintendo game to this one, and it was like the best thing ever. Oh my gosh, I loved it.
I mean, if you're comparing it to the weird ass first X-Men, which I think was Arcade's Revenge, is what it was on NES.
That. It was like X-Men from Nintendo, and it was terrible. You were like 3-inch sprites, and anyways.
It was rough. But this one was not the one that I was all about. I loved the idea because that was the X-Men that I grew up with, and so I wanted it to be good, and it just kind of wasn't. It was cool when you got like a cameo, like you would have like Jean Grey pop up for a second or Storm pop up for a second, but it just wasn't stellar. Now, that being said, the one that I do want to talk about is X-Men 2: The Clone Wars, which is literally one of the best X-Men games ever. It is up there as one of the best X-Men games ever.
It is really good.
Because you can play
absolutely good.
You can play as Beast, you can play as Gambit, you can play as Psylocke, you can play as Wolverine. And what I loved about Wolverine is you could climb the walls with his claws. What I loved about Beast is he could just sit on a wall. Like he could jump and just hop on a wall and just chill. And Psylocke had her Psy Knife, which is one of the best things ever.
Psylocke also could kick off walls. Like
yes.
Like I love that.
She could kick off walls and actually her little
enemies too. She can jump on their head.
It was actually the most effective attack, especially when you fight the giant sentinel. You could just sit there and bounce off and off and off of that over and over and over. It was a glitch.
Yep. Also, real quick, gotta have a shout out for the little trip move. She had like a spin, sweep move, and she had a cute butt.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Psylocke was on my crushes when I was a kid, for sure.
Oh yeah,
she was up there.
Absolutely.
I say it like it's not still there. It's still there.
Yeah,
that's still a thing. Okay, so those are mine. Josh, what is the last one you want to hit?
So the last one, and this one was like the best thing ever for me. I loved it so much. Is Comic Zone.
Yeah.
It's like you were playing through a comic. Like the story was the creator of this comic. There's like a monster inside the comic that pulls him in, and so he's literally like going through these like panels of comics, fighting, and then you have to like jump down to go through the other panels and everything. You're like punching and kicking, and it was just stupid fun. I think I just loved it.
Also, the art style was amazing.
It looked like a comic book.
Yeah, and it had like the comic font, and it played out like a comic. But also, my favorite part about Comic Zone is that the main character is the most 90s looking dude I have ever seen in my life.
Long blonde hair, shaved sides,
sweater vest,
tiny circle glasses.
Yep.
Sweater vest with a hood on it.
Boots and shorts.
Yep.
All of it. Like he's like 1994.
Fingerless gloves, people.
Yeah. Like He's 100%. If you think of any bully from an after school special in 1993, 94, it's him. Yeah.
But like he was like just built. He was ripped. And so he was just like, ugh.
Yeah. He looks like he's late to a Pearl Jam concert. That's what he looks like. It's amazing.
But he was late because he had to get all of his style.
Yeah. And he was sucked into his comic. He had the tickets. They were on his desk.
Yep. But he got sucked into the comic.
Yeah. Anyway, that's our episode. Dude, this one was fun. It was long, but it was fun because there were so many cool things to go over.
It was. And like, seriously, just like going back, like there's plenty of games. Also, really quick, I have to add another game. Freaking Jurassic Park.
Oh my gosh.
Jurassic Park on Genesis was so much better than Jurassic Park on Super Nintendo.
Fact.
Because you could play as a raptor or as it wasn't Grant, but it was I think it was the security guy from Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
But like, both were so much fun.
Yeah,
I
that
love
was
the
a good
Raptor,
one. That was a good
I
one.
love that.
Honestly, this is a console that I recommend that you can revisit at any time, and there's going to be some games that are going to play really well still. Nintendo has some gems for sure, but it's hard for me to go back. What's also really cool, before we wrap up, is you can actually play these on your browser. You can pick a game and you can play it. There's actually like I think it's called Play Sega Online, and all it is that you pick the game you want to play and it loads in your browser, and you can use your keyboard or you can use one of your plug and play controller devices and you can go through and play a game. And
Holy crap, I'm going to have to do this.
Yeah, give it a shot, guys. It's dope.
Oh, man.
So
that's awesome.
That's our episode. We hope you guys had fun. Yeah. And we have another episode coming up next week, obviously. This one is going to be back to kind of our normal format, but we're going to go over, I think, anime TV shows. That's what's going to be the next one.
Yes, and I've got to curb my enthusiasm a little bit.
Yeah, once again, we're going to be excited. We're going to go through some awesome stuff. But right now, It's time for you to go and find some Segas and maybe find a Sega emulator. I'm not against that. Or play it online. See what happens, okay?
Go get the Sega Mini. Like, it's got a lot of good games on it. It's got Comic Zone. Don't you worry.
There you go. Anyway, we hope you guys had fun, and we will talk to you next time.
Boy.
Geek Reloading Podcast with Adam and Josh. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Have a question? Email us at geekreloading@gmail.com. Theme song titled Rocket by Kevin MacLeod. You can rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on your preferred podcast service.